Stopwatch. How do you lock this thing?
That'll be for the Monica Chuck one.
Okay. Okay, there's got to be a way to lock this chair.
All right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Pittsburgh Law Enforcement Center for a candidate forum tonight, focusing on the race for Kansas Senate District 13. My name is Blake Benson. I'll serve as the moderator for tonight's event alongside Patrick Richardson, the managing editor of the Morning Sun, who will serve as the proctor for the questions that will be submitted from the audience. First of all, a big welcome to our candidates this evening, Lynn Grant and Jake LaTurner. Thank you both for being with us. Also, a big thanks to the City of Pittsburgh for hosting us this evening, and a big welcome to those that are in attendance here at the Law Enforcement Center, and also the residents and voters that are watching from home tonight. We welcome all of you. A couple of housekeeping notes. First of all, the format for this evening. Both candidates will be allowed 2 minutes for an opening statement. Then we'll go into a series of up to three prepared questions that the candidates have received in advance, and they will have 90 seconds to answer those questions. And then we'll take questions from the audience. We have cards and pens at the back of the room. If audience members would like to submit a question in writing, they're encouraged to do so. If they can get it to Mr. Richardson, the criteria that we have is that any questions that are submitted by the audience have to be fair and applicable to both candidates. So please don't try to ask a question that only applies to one candidate, because it will not be asked. Please make sure those are applicable to both candidates. And then once we get to about 5:50 or so, we'll head into our closing statements. And both candidates will be allowed 2 minutes for their closing statements. As you are answering your questions, when you get to 30 seconds left on your answer, I'll just show you a yellow card that lets you know that you've got 30 seconds to go. And then once you get to your time limit, I'll hold up the red card, and that means your time is up. I don't do that to distract you or anything like that. And basically, once I make eye contact with you, I'll put the card back down. So any questions about tonight's format before we get started? Okay. Well, we flipped a coin prior to the event, and Jake LaTurner, you'll give your opening statement first.
Thank you, Blake, and I want to thank everybody for being here tonight. Thank the Pittsburgh Chamber of Commerce and the Morning Sun for hosting this event. I think it's important that you're all here to be more informed on the issues. I want to thank my wife, Suzanne, for being here tonight. We met here at Pitt State and been here ever since. We have 4 kids now, Ava, Joe, Maggie, and Gus, who's just a month old, and if you hear a baby cry, that's it. Topeka has a lot of problems. We have a tax system that needs reformed. We have a budget that needs balanced. We need to make sure that we pass a no budget, no pay provision, so that if the legislature can't achieve the minimum task of balancing the budget, they shouldn't receive a paycheck. We need fair funding for our schools. We need to make sure that Southeast Kansas kids are on a level playing field with children from across the state. And we need more transparency in state government. We need to make sure that our floor debates are live streamed for everyone to watch at home, to know what's going on in the legislature. This is a choice election, if ever there was one. I know that my opponent is someone that cares about her family, her community, and her state. We just disagree on the issues. On the Second Amendment, I think the Second Amendment is an important right. I'm endorsed by the NRA. My opponent has an F from the NRA. On welfare reform, I believe that work requirements with job training, drug testing with treatment is good public policy. My opponent calls it cruel and punitive. On middle-class taxes, I think middle-class taxes and working poor taxes are too high. My opponent wants to increase middle-class taxes by 40%, wants to increase taxes on the working poor by 100%. We can't afford that policy in Kansas. So I'm glad that you're here. I encourage you all to pay attention, and I look forward to the questions.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Turner. Ms. Grant, you have 2 minutes.
Good evening. I want to thank the Chamber for hosting this event and all of you for taking the time tonight to visit with us. I've been part of the community that is Southeast Kansas for close to 50 years. I have years of experience serving the people I will be representing. Through 12 years on the Cherokee City Council, working at the Southeast School District, owning and operating a family business, and now working at Pittsburg State. I've been involved in many community activities. I serve on the boards of Big Brutus and El Makers Foundations. These life experiences, I believe, have given me a good background for dealing with people on all levels. And now I'd like to represent you in Topeka. This was not an easy decision to make. It took a lot of discussion, prayer, courage, and commitment, all things that will serve me well, along with common sense, compassion, and the willingness to compromise. I've been told I'm too soft-spoken, but I have the courage of my convictions, and I will stand up for what's best for this district. I believe when you serve the public, the question must be, how can I serve you? Differences of opinion should be respected. It is the people of the district that must be represented and listened to, not special interests, party leadership, or the governor. I'm very grateful for the support I've had from hundreds of local people and many across the state. I'm endorsed by KNEA, Kansas State Firefighters, Economic Lifelines, Kansas Families for Education, United Transportation Union, Women for Kansas, AFT Kansas, Kansas Advancing Women, and the Kansas Association of School Boards. There is definitely a desire for change and a new direction in Kansas. I'm willing to take on the challenges that face our state using common sense and commitment to your needs. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both. Okay, we'll now move into a series of questions that, as I mentioned, the candidates received about a week ago. We've already gotten a couple of good questions from the audience and look forward to asking those in just a moment. But for the first prepared question, will be answered first by you, Ms. Grant, and the question is this. A considerable topic of discussion over the past year is that of whether the state should expand its Medicaid program, also known as CanCare. What is your position on CanCare expansion? You have 90 seconds.
Expansion of CanCare in Kansas is a must. The fact that it has not even had a hearing in the legislature tells volumes about what is important. Partisan ideology rather than concern for the people and the economy of the state. Kansas has lost almost $1.5 billion of our own tax money since January 2014. Expansion would allow over 150,000 Kansans to be able to get health care. This will allow those people to get regular checkups, to maintain good health, and test to determine if there are unknown health issues that can be treated. I've talked to hospital administrators and health care clinics in this district, as well as organizations that serve the disabled. They all say we have to expand Medicaid. In Crawford County alone, almost 2,000 residents would get access to health care coverage, and over $1 million, $8 million would enter our economy. I don't want to see hospitals in this district fail. Doctors leave, or people lose their jobs or lives because of callous decisions made in Topeka.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Grant. Mr. Turner.
Thanks for the question. Medicaid expansion is not that simple. I think most people that are sensible will agree that Obamacare has not turned out the way it was sold to us several years back. I don't know how many of you saw the article, premiums going up 25%. That's something that greatly concerns me. I was opposed to plain Medicaid expansion. Now what's happened is the Hospital Association has come out with a new plan. The new plan says that the Hospital Association will pick up the tab. I think that has makes a lot more sense. I think that there is some version of that I could support. We'll have to see what the final product is. But at a bare minimum, it absolutely deserves to be debated, and it deserves an up or down vote in the House and the Senate.
Okay, thank you both. Second question will be answered first by you, Mr. LaTurner. As you both know, the completion of the Highway 69 project has long been one of this area's top priorities. However, the state's current fiscal situation has clouded the future of this vital project. If elected or re-elected, what would you do to move the Highway 69 project forward? Mr. LaTurner.
Highway 69 project is something that's very important to me. It's been promised to Southeast Kansas for decades. Just several months ago, the governor and the Department of Transportation canceled the Highway 69 project because of tough work by myself, Representative Smith, we were able to fight and get the first portion of the project put back in place and moved up nearly a year in time. Last week, the bids came in. The estimated cost was $26 million. It came in at $20 million. So my goal now is to make sure that we get the $6 million to go towards Highway 69. But that's only a short-term issue. The long-term issue is how do we prevent the legislatures and the governor from stealing money from KDOT to make sure that the project is there for us in the future? And the answer to that, in my opinion, is a constitutional amendment. I proposed it last year. It's the only real way to make sure that folks don't continue to stick their hands into the bank of KDOT. It's common sense, and so I support that, and that's what we need to do to protect highway funding in the long term.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Letourneau. Ms. Grant.
Well, first let me say that I have always been supportive of the expansion of Highway 69, and I appreciate every inch of concrete that's been poured. I'm somewhat encouraged by the letting of the first leg of the expansion from Fort Scott to the county line. However, I am a little skeptical. We have heard promises before which have not come true. I do have to say that I'm very happy that the bid was let to a Kansas company. We've all been pretty disappointed over the delays of 69 Highway and road work on US 166 in Cherokee County. Maybe disappointed is not a strong enough word. Wayne Goodmanson, KDOT District 4 engineer, spoke to Crawford County Commission not long ago, and as much as said that the planned expansion of 69 Highway would be years away. I may never see it. The transfers of over $2 billion in the last 6 years have crippled the T-Works. Governor Mike Hayden had this to say when the original transportation program was enacted in 1989. These roads aren't free, and they aren't cheap. But if you're going to invest in the future of your country and your state, you have to make that kind of commitment. Deb Miller, Secretary of Transportation, said, yes, things might look good today, but I can see real trouble around the corner.
Thank you, Ms. Grant. All right, our third prepared question for tonight will be answered first by Ms. Grant, and the question is this. Education is likely to play a key role in the 2017 legislative session, as the legislature is expected to begin writing a new K-12 public school finance formula. Please discuss some concepts or areas you would like to see addressed in the new formula, and whether some concepts take priority over others. 90 seconds.
Bob worked on the now defunct school funding formula in his first year in the legislature. He thought it was one of, if not the best pieces of legislation that came out of his 20 years in office. It's still praised for its fairness, weighting mechanisms, items that work for both wealthy schools and those in need. It was constitutional. The most impressive thing about the funding formula is that it was the result of efforts put forth in an overwhelmingly bipartisan, or should I say, nonpartisan manner. The old formula was not bad or that confusing. It was the funding or lack of it that got us in trouble. This, in my opinion, will be the most important piece of legislation that will be taken up in this session. Eliminating the old formula was like throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I would like to see a legislative review of the old formula and use what worked. Equalization across the state for all students is a priority. More important is in the whole issue is to do what is right for kids, no matter where they live or the size of their district. We need to get it right this time. I would lay out the goals, what is needed, what and then, and build from that, and leave party politics the hell out of it.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Grant. Mr. Letourneau.
Thanks, Blake. This is a question that's near and dear to my heart. I come from a family of educators. My dad is an elementary school principal, my wife is a teacher, my brother's a teacher, and I'm a graduate of the poorest school district in the state of Kansas. My first session in Topeka, the first amendment that I ever introduced was to put more money into the equalization formula. And it's because Southeast Kansas schools and poorer school districts have been getting a raw deal for a very long time. My colleagues were scratching their head when I was talking about it, and then luckily the next year the Supreme Court came out and ruled that we need to equalize school funding. And that is going to be the big debate in this next session. We're going to build a new school finance plan. And we need to make sure that Southeast Kansas has a senator that's at the table where the decisions are being made. We have to make certain that Johnson County isn't writing the formula, because if they are, it's not going to be good for us. It's another big difference. In the Kansas Senate, there are 32 Republicans and 8 Democrats. I will have a seat at the table. And if you look back issue after issue, if my opponent were in my role for the last 4 years, there would not be a Southeast Kansas casino. Pitt State would have been cut $400,000 more this last year. They would not have received $1 million funding enhancement for career and tech ed. And Highway 69 would not be happening right now. It is vital that if Southeast Kansas wants change, that we have a seat at the table. I will have that seat.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Letourneau. Okay, our first question from the audience, and we've got time for several more, so I would encourage anyone else that may have a question to submit it on a card in the back and get it to Mr. Richardson. The first submitted question will be answered first by Mr. Letourneau, and the question is this. Do you believe the 2012 and subsequent income tax cuts are the primary reason for the state's budget issues? And or what will you do to improve things?
Yes, it
90
is.
seconds.
It's a huge issue of why we had the problems. I've said it passed the year before I've got to Topeka, and every year since it's caused a lot of issues. We have to revisit the tax formula. We have to make it more fair. I think that we need to put everything on the table except increasing taxes on the middle class and the working poor. The middle class cannot afford a 40% tax increase, and so I think that's a big mistake. The other things that are vitally important and causing a lot of this distress in Kansas are the big industries. Agriculture is having a very difficult time in Kansas. Aviation is having a difficult time in Kansas, and oil and gas.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Letourneau. Ms. Grant, 90 seconds.
To repeat.
Absolutely. Do you believe the 2012 and subsequent income tax cuts are the primary reason for the state's budget issues? And or what will you do to improve things?
I do believe that they are a big reason for our tax policies that we have that aren't working. I have to remind that Senator Letourneau did vote for the highest tax increase in Kansas history, and that has affected over 3 million people. In turn, he also voted for that because his tax lid bill was included. He mentioned that he was against the tax increase, but when it came down to it, he chose his tax lid bill over 3 million people.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Grant. Okay, our second question submitted from the audience tonight will be answered first by Ms. Grant, and the question is this. Where do you stand on the effort presently underway to oust 4 of the 5 sitting Supreme Court justices? Why are you for or against this effort?
I'm against this effort because I believe that we have 3 branches of government and they should be separate. The decisions that the courts have made that have been challenged have been they've been overturned less than 1/3% all the time. This did not start with the Carr brothers. This started with the lack of school funding, and the Constitution has to win out over desires of a personal opinion.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Grant. Mr. Letourneau.
I appreciate the question, but first let me just comment and say this largest tax increase in state history is just not true. My opponent claims that it's a $400 million tax increase or several hundred million. It was less than 60 million, the tax increase. She wants to have it both ways. I've increased taxes through the ceiling and we've cut every program in the state. It doesn't make sense. I was against the tax bill even though that it was small. The reason I voted for it in the end was because of the property tax lid. The property tax lid goes into effect in January, and it's going to allow every citizen in the state to vote on property tax increases above the rate of inflation. Southeast Kansans, their backs are breaking from high property taxes, and we need to stop that. This will put Kansans in charge. I trust Kansans to make those decisions. My opponent wants to repeal the property tax lid. It's another big difference between the two of us. Now on to the justices. When it comes to this, look, I think we need 3 separate but equal branches of government as well. There have been some tricks that were attempted in the Kansas legislature to put what's called a non-severability clause in a budget, that if the court strikes down one issue within the budget, their funding goes away. Now, I thought that was nonsense. I killed the bill, voted against it, came back the next day, and they muscled enough votes to pass it. I still voted no. So I believe that. What this issue comes down to for me is something very personal. I'm pro-life. I'm endorsed by Kansans for life. I believe that there are several justices on the Supreme Court that are not. I believe that they impose their own views on the issue and don't follow the law.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Turner. Okay, we're down to our last questions submitted from the audience, and unless we receive more, then we'll go after the candidates answer this question. We'll go into the closing statements. So last chance for anybody in the audience to submit a question. This question will be answered first by Mr. Turner, and I will let you know that it's a pretty weighty question, but it does pass the criteria of applying to both candidates. But I'll probably go ahead and read it twice, just so everybody can hear it appropriately. Please explain your position on abortion rights and include how you will vote in Topeka on the issue. Please explain your position on abortion rights and include specifically how you will vote in Topeka on the issue.
That's
Mr.
not a tough question at all. I'm pro-life. I'm endorsed by Kansans for life. I have a 100% pro-life voting record. I think that is an important issue. I've led on issues like banning dismemberment abortion, which is just as gruesome as it sounds. The court are holding that law up right now, which is a travesty. And it's another area that my opponent and I have a big difference of opinion. My opponent supports funding for Planned Parenthood. She asks her friends to wear pink to support Planned Parenthood. She said that she would not vote for the dismemberment abortion ban, which is an enormous issue. So I think it's an important issue. It's an important distinction between the two of us, and I think voters should take that into account when they make their decision.
Thank you, Mr. LaTurner. Ms. Grant, 90 seconds.
Well, I don't believe I ever said that I would vote for dismemberment.
Joplin Globe, June of this year.
Different Joplin Globe than I've read. I am pro-life. I support life from the unborn through the aged. I think a lot of people have put words in my mouth. I believe also that whatever we do in Kansas, we've about gone as far as we can go because of the Supreme Court supremacy. The land of the Supreme Court Constitution of the United States takes precedence over state laws. So everything that we can do now is simply going to end up in court. It's going to cost money, and I don't believe that we will ever actually be able to stop abortion. I think we have to do what we can to prevent it, but until there's something that changes, it's a national issue, not ours.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Grant. Okay, we've gotten a couple of additional questions from the audience that we'll be able to ask, and the first question will be answered first by you, Ms. Grant. Do you support increases in funding for providers that support persons with disabilities? And if so, how would you try to increase rates? Do you support increases in funding for providers that support persons with disabilities? And if so, how would you try to increase rates?
Well, that's kind of an odd question.
And I think, and I'm I'm not trying to speak for the person that submitted it, perhaps reimbursement rates or the rates to the providers of those with disabilities. I'm not sure. I probably shouldn't pontificate on what they meant by the question. I should probably
Right.
just ask it as is.
I believe that the rates of reimbursement or pay for people who do provide those services should be more fair, equal to what the jobs they do. They keep people in their homes. They allow elderly to stay. And I don't for sure know what those rates are, but that would have to be something I'd look at before I could say I would raise them.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Grant. Mr. LaTurner.
Yeah, they took a hit this year, and it hurt. And it all comes back to getting our budget in order and getting our revisiting our tax policy. I believe that the budget, we've got to not just look at today and tomorrow, we've got to look at the long-term future of our state. And that's why I think it's so important that we pass provisions that say if the legislature cannot pass a balanced budget, they shouldn't receive a paycheck. Once we get the budget in order, we revisit our tax policy, I think we can straighten a lot of things like that out.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. LaTurner. Okay. Mr. LaTurner, you will answer this next question submitted from the audience. You'll answer this first. And it's a short question, so I'll go ahead and answer it ask it twice.
You can answer it too.
Yeah,
That'd
no,
be fine.
that's all.
Yeah.
That's all you guys. Do you think the funds dedicated to early childhood programs should be retained? Do you think the funds dedicated to early childhood programs should be retained? 90 seconds.
Of course, it's very important. There was an attempt that I'm sure many of you saw to sell the tobacco revenue that goes to these important programs this year. That was a mistake. Again, I'll refer you back to my previous answer. We've got to make sure we get the budget in order.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. LaTurner. Ms. Grant.
Definitely, we have to keep our childhood education programs. The attempts by the legislature and the governor to remove a lot of that funding has been a travesty. It's money that is meant for the early childhood programs. And the governor says that he supports kindergarten readiness and all this stuff, but then he turns around and he tries to cut the funding for it. I think that's wrong. We have to have a good base for our kids when they start at school, and pre-K, pre-12, pre-kindergarten plays a big part in that.
Okay. All right. Seeing no more questions from the audience, we'll now move into our closing statements. The candidates will each be allowed 2 minutes for their closing statements. Ms. Grant, you will go first.
Again, thank you for your time tonight. There are clear differences in the approach my opponent and I take toward the issues affecting Kansas. The senator has aligned himself with Governor Brownback on so many issues that have hurt Kansas of all ages and economic levels. Tip O'Neill made this statement: the moral test of government is how it treats those who are in the dawn of life, the children, those in the twilight of life, the aged, and those who are in the shadows of life, the sick, the needy, and the handicapped. I believe that the Brownback-LaTurner Kansas would not pass that test. We are failing our children's education on all levels. Child poverty is on the rise. The Department of Children and Family Services neglects its obligations. Senior Care Act has been cut by almost a third. Non-reimbursable medical expenses are no longer deductions of income tax, and nursing homes are not being reimbursed in a timely manner, leading to cuts in staff and services. Organizations like Skill and Tri-Valley, who serve the most vulnerable, have suffered cuts in reimbursements and programs as well as staff. The refusal to even consider expanding Medicaid shows a lack of consideration for Kansas as well as our economy. Our safety has been put in jeopardy by the constant theft of funds from transportation. I'm an optimist. I believe we can stop this tailspin, but it will take many years to do it. We have to start the change now. I'm not looking for a career. I'm not tied to purse strings, party strings, or puppet strings. The only ones I have to answer to are you, myself, and God. This is our election, this is our state, and this is our time to return to the Kansas we all know and love.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Grant. Mr. LaTurner, 2 minutes.
Look, I understand what my opponent's attempt is. She, like the rest of America, knows that we have a governor in Kansas that is incredibly unpopular. And so she believes she can get elected by distorting the truth and tying me to all of the governor's positions. The governor and I have had incredible disagreements when it comes to Highway 69, when it comes to his tax plan, when it comes to making sure that our kids have an equal footing to stand on in southeast Kansas when it comes to education. My opponent and I, as you've seen, have enormous disagreements on the issues, ranging from the Second Amendment to welfare reform to middle-class taxes to the property tax lid to abortion and on and on and on. But as I said before, we need to make sure that we have a senator who has a seat at the table. It doesn't matter what your opinion is on welfare reform or Medicaid expansion. If southeast Kansas doesn't have a voice, doesn't have a seat at the table, it won't matter. We have to make sure that we have a senator who has a seat at the table. I will, and my opponent will not. I thank you all very much for being here. I look forward to visiting with you after, and thank you again to the Morning Sun and to the Chamber for hosting this event.
Thank you, Mr. LaTurner. I hope our audience members will give both candidates a big round of applause for a job well done. Thank you again to the City of Pittsburgh for hosting us tonight. We'll take a little break. Want to remind everybody that we'll come back at 6 o'clock and we'll have a candidate forum focusing on the Kansas House District 3 race that will begin at 6 p.m. this evening. Thank you again.